They celebrated my death and started dividing my $92 million inheritance. When I walked into that lawyer's office and saw Sarah with champagne in her hand, the way that glass shattered on the marble floor when she saw me. Well, let me tell you exactly what happened 6 months before that moment. I was supposed to be recovering from a heart attack. That's what everyone kept telling me anyway. "Good morning, Mom," Sarah said, bringing me breakfast. "How are we feeling today?" I looked at her with confusion. "Better, I think, though I'm still confused about some of the paperwork you showed me yesterday." She gave me that quick, dismissive smile. "Don't worry about any of that business stuff. Michael and I are handling everything now. You just focus on getting stronger." My son Michael came in, kissing my forehead. "Morning, Mom. Dr. Morrison called. He wants to schedule another follow-up this week." "Another one?" I asked. "Didn't I just see him?" "Memory's still a bit fuzzy from the medication," Michael said. "It's completely normal after a cardiac event." "Of course, the medication." Sarah's phone buzzed. She stepped into the hallway, but I could still hear her. "Not now." "Yes, everything's on schedule. She's getting weaker every day." Everything's on schedule. That phrase echoed in my mind. Later that afternoon, Sarah was organizing papers. "I've consolidated all your accounts into this one statement. Much simpler to track everything this way." I examined the document carefully. This withdrawal pattern, it's unusual. Typically, you'd stagger large transfers to minimize tax implications. "Mom," Sarah interrupted, "you're overthinking everything. That's exactly the kind of stress Dr. Morrison said to avoid." I noticed boxes stacked in the corner, labeled Mom's Office. My Bar Association certificates, my legal journals, all packed away like old clothes. What happened to my law books? "We moved them to storage," Michael said. "Easier to clean without all that clutter." 45 years of legal expertise reduced to clutter. I saw a framed photograph on the side table, face down now. Me shaking hands with federal judge Margaret Chen after winning a landmark elder rights case. "That contract language you had me sign yesterday," I said carefully. The power of attorney clause seemed overly broad for a simple medical directive. "It's standard language, Mom. You're reading complications that aren't there." But I knew contract language like a pianist knows scales. That document had been anything but standard. The phone rang. Michael answered in hushed tones. "No, not yet. Give us another month. She has to be completely incapacitated before we can move forward." Incapacitated. They needed me to be incompetent for whatever plan they were executing. The next morning, I was sorting mail when I found something interesting. "This is odd," I said. Sarah appeared quickly. "What is it, Mom?" "This notice about a large withdrawal attempt that was flagged. $200,000 that required additional verification." Sarah's mask slipped for just a moment. "Oh, that. I moved some of your money into a higher yield account. Better returns for your future care needs." "Which account?" "The Fidelity one, remember? We discussed this last week." We'd never discussed any such thing. "I don't remember authorizing any transfers. Could I see the original bank statements? All of them." Michael entered. "Mom, we don't want to stress you with paperwork. Your health comes first." "Michael," I said, letting steel enter my voice. "I've been managing complex financial portfolios for 45 years. I think I can handle reviewing my own bank statements." "Of course," Sarah said. "But they're all digital now. So complicated. Why don't I just print summaries?" "I'd like the originals. Today." They were afraid of those bank statements. That evening, I listened through the heating vent. Sarah's voice carried up from the kitchen. "She's asking too many questions about the money." "Dr. Morrison said the medication would keep her foggy," Michael replied. "Maybe we need to increase the dosage." "We can't wait much longer. She won't last much longer anyway, but if she starts demanding lawyers—" "She is a lawyer, Sarah." "Was a lawyer. Now she's a confused old woman with a heart condition. Morrison will back us up about her mental state. What if she tries to contact her old firm? She doesn't even remember their names. And if she does, well, accidents happen to people with serious heart conditions. Accidents. They were prepared to eliminate me if I became trouble. Sarah brought my evening pills. I palmed them instead of swallowing. After she left, I examined them. These weren't cardiac medications, lorazepam. Anti-anxiety medication that could keep someone confused, compliant. They'd been drugging me for months. Early the next morning, I accessed Michael's computer. Investment account login successful. Portfolio value, $8,347,291. But it should have been over $12 million. Systematic withdrawals for 18 months. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. All going to Healthcare Trust, Michael Hartwell trustee. I found the trust documents. Beneficiaries, Michael Hartwell, 50%. Sarah Hartwell, 50%. Purpose, management of assets for incapacitated family member. They'd been planning my incompetency for over a year. When Michael called from upstairs, I resumed my weak voice. Just getting some water, dear. But I'd seen enough. 18 months of systematic elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraudulent medical documentation. They thought I was too confused to notice. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Over the next few days, I started noticing everything differently. Every person around me became a suspect. Every conversation had hidden meaning. Every gesture carried the weight of conspiracy. Sarah was the obvious mastermind. The way she controlled every conversation, every document, every decision about my care. But her manipulation ran deeper than simple greed. She genuinely seemed to enjoy the power, the control, the way she could make me doubt my own perceptions with just a smile and a condescending word. Michael's desperation was different. Messier. More pathetic. I could see the gambling addiction eating him alive from the inside. The way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking. The way he checked his phone constantly, probably monitoring betting apps or dodging calls from creditors. But there were others involved. Dr. Morrison, our family physician for 15 years. I'd trusted him with my life, literally. How long had he been building a medical case against my competency? How many other elderly patients had he betrayed for money? I made some calls, disguising my voice as different people. Massachusetts Medical Board. How can I help you? I'm calling to verify the license status of Dr. Richard Morrison, I said, pretending to be a concerned patient. Dr. Morrison's license is currently under review pending several ethics complaints, the voice replied. I can't provide more details, but I'd recommend seeking care elsewhere. Ethics complaints. Multiple ones. I wasn't his first victim. Then I called the real estate board. I'm calling to verify the license status of Michael Hartwell. I'm sorry, but Mr. Hartwell's license has been suspended pending investigation of ethics violations and client fund misappropriation. Client fund misappropriation. He'd been stealing from clients too. Jake Morrison, the doctor's nephew, had mentioned needing help with medical school tuition when he visited last month, but when I checked online, he'd actually dropped out of medical school 2 years ago. So, what was the money really for? I began investigating the way I'd handled cases for 45 years. Methodically, carefully, building an unshakable case piece by piece. The withdrawal patterns from my accounts weren't random. They were timed perfectly to avoid triggering federal banking regulations. Someone with sophisticated financial knowledge had planned every transfer. Someone who understood the system well enough to game it. I used my old laptop, the one they thought I'd forgotten how to use, to research everything. Michael's gambling problem wasn't just poker games with friends or weekend trips to Foxwoods. He was into professional sports betting, online poker, even foreign currency speculation. The kind of high-stakes gambling that leaves you owing money to people who don't accept payment plans. Sarah had been researching elder abuse tactics online for over 2 years. Her browser history, which I accessed through their shared Wi-Fi network, was a masterclass in predatory planning. Legal guardianship procedures, estate planning loopholes, medical manipulation techniques, even psychology articles about how to gaslight elderly family members. She'd been studying how to destroy my life for years. "We need to schedule another cognitive assessment," Dr. Morrison told me during my next appointment. His voice carried that practiced concern I now recognized as performance. "Your family is worried about some confusion episodes." "Confusion episodes?" I asked, playing along. "I don't remember being confused." "That's exactly what we're concerned about," he said, making notes in my file with elaborate care. "Memory gaps, difficulty processing information, emotional volatility, all common after cardiac events." I watched him write. Even upside down, I could read his handwriting. He was documenting symptoms I'd never exhibited, creating a medical narrative that would support their legal case. "What kind of assessment?" I asked. "Standard cognitive evaluation. Memory tests, reasoning exercises, basic life skills assessment. Nothing too stressful." But I knew what he meant. Tests designed to make me fail, questions with no right answers, scenarios crafted to demonstrate incompetence. That night, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in Michael's desk drawer was a medical report with my name on it, dated 3 days before any evaluation had actually taken place. Patient Eleanor Hartwell, age 72, presents with significant cognitive decline following cardiac event. Demonstrates confusion regarding financial matters, inability to process complex information, and poor judgment regarding personal safety. Cognitive assessment scores: memory 310, reasoning 210, decision-making capacity 110. Patient requires immediate supervision and is no longer capable of managing personal affairs. Recommend urgent guardianship evaluation for patient safety and welfare. The report was already written. They just needed me to show up and fail the predetermined test. Dr. Morrison had been building a medical case against me for months. False cognitive evaluations, fabricated incidents of confusion, even a staged fall that supposedly demonstrated my declining physical condition. I found photos on Sarah's phone of me looking confused in situations I remembered perfectly well. Maria Gonzalez, my cleaning lady for 10 years, had been reporting on my daily activities: what time I woke up, what I ate, whether I seemed confused or alert, whether I had visitors or made phone calls. They'd been paying her $300 a month to spy on me. When I confronted her about it, she broke down crying. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm so sorry. My grandson needed surgery, and they said you wanted me to keep an eye on you for your own safety. They said your family was worried." My neighbors, Bob and Helen Henderson, had been told I was developing dementia and to call Sarah if they saw me doing anything concerning, like checking my own mail, or talking to delivery drivers, or having conversations they couldn't overhear. "We were just worried about you, Eleanor," Helen told me when I asked. "Sarah said you'd been having episodes, and we should watch out for your safety." They'd weaponized my entire community against me. But the most devastating discovery was the scope of their financial planning. This wasn't desperate theft. This was systematic asset stripping with sophisticated legal protection. Bob Chen, my financial advisor for 20 years, had been redirecting my investments without authorization. Higher yield accounts that didn't exist. Tax optimization strategies that funneled money into accounts controlled by Michael and Sarah. When I called his office, I was told he was no longer available and had relocated his practice. Translation: he'd disappeared with my money and probably other clients' assets too. They'd opened credit cards in my name, applied for loans using my house as collateral, even taken out additional life insurance policies with themselves as beneficiaries. My credit report, which I accessed online, showed financial activity I'd never authorized spanning back 18 months. The guardianship petition wasn't just filed. It was already approved for hearing. The date was set for 2 weeks from now. They'd submitted medical evidence, financial evidence, and witness statements about my supposed incompetence. Everything was in place for them to take legal control of my life. But I found something else. Something that changed everything. A folder labeled Timeline in Sarah's computer. Inside was a document called Optimal Outcome Scenarios. Scenario 1. Successful guardianship and nursing home placement within 6 months. Asset liquidation timeline, 3 months. Estimated recovery, 11. $2 million. Scenario 2. Accelerated medical decline requiring hospice care within 3 months. Insurance payout timeline, immediate. Estimated recovery, 8. $7 million plus insurance. Scenario 3. Sudden cardiac event with expected outcome within 2 months. Insurance payout, immediate. Estate settlement, expedited. Estimated recovery, 12. $8 million plus insurance benefits. They had planned my death, multiple versions of it, with profit projections. But it got worse. Under Scenario 3, there were subcategories: natural presentation methods, medication interactions, stress induction techniques, physical triggers for cardiac events. They hadn't just planned to steal my money. They'd planned to murder me and calculated the most profitable timeline for doing it. The optimal date for my sudden cardiac event was 3 days after the guardianship hearing. Right after they'd gained legal control, but before any investigators could start asking questions about the suspicious timing. I wasn't dealing with family members who'd made bad choices. I was dealing with predators who'd spent years planning the systematic destruction of my life. And they thought I was too confused and weak to stop them. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. I decided to confront them directly. After 45 years in courtrooms, I knew that sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponents reveal themselves. "I know about the missing money," I said during dinner, my voice carrying just the right note of confused hurt. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the soft hum of the refrigerator, even the distant sound of traffic on Maple Street. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Michael's face went completely white. It was beautiful to watch. Michael broke first, exactly as I'd predicted. His face crumpled like wet paper, and the tears started flowing. Real tears, which surprised me. Maybe there was still something human left in him after all. I was desperate, Mom. The gambling debts. These people, they don't just send bills. They send messages. I owed $200,000 to people who break legs for late payments. I just borrowed $50,000 from your accounts. I was going to pay it back, I swear, on Dad's grave. The tears looked genuine. The remorse seemed real. The desperation in his voice was completely convincing. If I hadn't known about the systematic planning, the forged documents, the murder scenarios, I might have believed him. Sarah played her part to perfection. The concerned daughter-in-law, the family mediator trying to hold everyone together during a crisis. "We'll figure this out," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand with what felt like genuine warmth. Michael made a terrible mistake, but we're family. We work through problems together. That's what families do. She was good, really good. I could see why Michael had fallen for her manipulation. She had this way of making her control feel like care, her manipulation feel like love. They had their entire story ready. Michael was the scapegoat, the gambling addict who'd stolen from his mother in a moment of desperate weakness. Sarah was the innocent wife, just trying to help manage a difficult situation while protecting everyone involved. "I'll pay back every penny," Michael said, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "I'll get a second job. I'll sell my car, my watch, anything I have to. I'll work 3 jobs if that's what it takes." They outlined a detailed repayment plan. $50,000 over 2 years, monthly payments of $2,100. Michael promised to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings. They talked about getting me better medical care, clearing up any paperwork confusion that might have occurred during my recovery. "We've scheduled an appointment with your lawyer tomorrow," Sarah said over dessert, her voice gentle and concerned. "Bernard Collins. Just to organize everything properly, make sure all your affairs are in order. We want to be completely transparent about everything." "That sounds very wise," I said, nodding like a confused old woman who was grateful for their help. The performance that followed was worthy of an Oscar. We had what felt like a real family dinner after that conversation. Sarah cooked my favorite meal, pot roast with those little red potatoes I've always loved, green beans with almonds, fresh bread from the bakery downtown. Michael was attentive in ways he hadn't been in years. He told stories about Emma, my granddaughter, who I barely got to see anymore. He promised to bring her by more often, maybe even let her stay overnight on weekends like she used to. He talked about taking better care of me, being the son I deserved. He apologized for being distant, for letting work and stress get in the way of family. He even mentioned planning a vacation together, maybe a trip to see the fall colors in Vermont like we used to do when he was younger. For 2 hours, sitting at that dinner table with my son and daughter-in-law, I almost believed it myself. The warmth felt real. The promises sounded genuine. The love seemed authentic. Maybe I had been paranoid. Maybe the stress of the heart attack, the medications, the isolation had made me suspicious of normal family concern. Maybe they really were just trying to help, and Michael had just made one terrible mistake driven by desperation. Maybe I was the problem. But that night, after they thought I was safely asleep in my room, I heard Sarah on the phone in the kitchen below. "Phase 1 complete," she said quietly, her voice completely different from the caring daughter-in-law who'd served me dinner. "The old bitch bought every word. Now we wait for tomorrow's appointment and move to Phase 2. Phase 1. There were multiple phases to their plan, and making me believe their lies was just the first step. I crept back to Michael's computer that night, my heart pounding with anger rather than any cardiac condition. The guardianship petition was still there, still filed, still scheduled for hearing. Despite all the apologies and promises, despite the tears and the repayment plans, nothing had actually changed. But I found something new. A document I hadn't seen before, hidden in a folder labeled Future Planning. Sunset Manor Care Facility, Admission Application. The form was completely filled out with my information. My name, my supposed medical conditions, my alleged cognitive limitations. The admission date was set for the day after the guardianship hearing. They'd planned my institutionalization before they'd even bothered to fake their apology. There was more, much more. Life insurance policies I didn't know existed, with death benefits totaling $2 million. Healthcare directives I'd never signed, giving them the right to make all medical decisions including end-of-life care. Financial powers of attorney that went far beyond anything I'd actually agreed to, giving them access to accounts, investments, and assets I didn't even know they knew about. A detailed floor plan of Sunset Manor, with notes about visiting schedules, staff rotations, and optimal timing for minimal supervision. The stolen $50,000 wasn't the crime. It was the cover story. A small, believable theft to distract from the real conspiracy. They were going to have me declared legally incompetent, take control of my entire estate, and lock me away in a nursing home where I couldn't interfere with their plans. And if I became too much trouble, if I somehow managed to challenge their control or expose their fraud, well, Sunset Manor had an excellent hospice program. I found the contract they'd already signed with the funeral home. Hillcrest Memorial Services. My burial plot was already purchased. The service was already planned. They'd even selected the flowers, white lilies, which I've always hated. Sarah had picked out the dress they planned to bury me in, a navy blue outfit I'd worn to court proceedings, which seemed fitting in a horrible way. They'd planned every detail of my death and funeral before they'd even gained legal control of my life. But the most chilling discovery was in Sarah's email drafts, a condolence announcement she'd already written, ready to send to my friends and former colleagues. It is with heavy hearts that we announce the peaceful passing of Eleanor Hartwell, beloved mother and grandmother, who lost her courageous battle with dementia and heart disease on date to be determined. Eleanor spent her final months surrounded by family who loved her dearly. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the Alzheimer's Association. Dementia, a disease I'd never had, mentioned in my own obituary. They'd written my death before they'd bothered to kill me. The scope of their conspiracy wasn't just breathtaking, it was professional. This wasn't a family driven to desperate measures. This was organized crime masquerading as caregiving. I found emails going back 3 years, not just months, years. Sarah had been researching elder abuse tactics since 2021, 2 full years before my heart attack. Legal guardianship procedures, estate planning loopholes, medical manipulation techniques, psychology articles about gaslighting elderly family members. She'd even taken online courses in elder care management and healthcare advocacy to learn the system well enough to exploit it. The connection with Dr. Morrison went much deeper than I'd realized. His nephew Jake wasn't just struggling with medical school loans. He'd been expelled from medical school for falsifying research data. The money they'd promised him wasn't for tuition. It was payment for his role in falsifying my cognitive evaluations with his basic medical training. Dr. Morrison himself was drowning financially. His practice was failing due to multiple malpractice suits. His medical malpractice insurance had been canceled due to unpaid premiums. His house was in foreclosure. His daughter's wedding, which he'd been posting about on social media, had cost him over $60,000 he didn't have. My case wasn't just about helping family, it was about professional survival for him. He needed the money Sarah was paying him to avoid complete bankruptcy and potential criminal charges for insurance fraud in other cases. But the criminal network extended far beyond my immediate family. I discovered that Maria, my cleaning lady, hadn't just been reporting my daily activities. She'd been photographing documents, recording conversations on her phone, even going through my personal belongings to inventory valuables for Sarah's planning purposes. "Mrs. Hartwell, they told me you had asked them to keep track of your things because you were forgetting," Maria confessed when I confronted her. "They said you wanted someone to make sure you didn't lose anything important." Bob Chen, my financial advisor for 20 years, had been systematically redirecting my investments for 18 months. Higher yield accounts that were actually accounts controlled by shell companies Sarah had established. Tax optimization strategies that moved my money through multiple banks to obscure the paper trail. When I finally reached him by phone, his explanation was practiced and smooth. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry about the confusion. Your family asked me to consolidate things to make them easier to manage. I thought you'd been informed." "I never authorized any of these transfers, Bob." "Well, Sarah has your power of attorney for financial matters. She showed me the paperwork. Paperwork I'd never signed, authorizing transfers I'd never approved. Even my neighbors had been recruited into the conspiracy. Bob and Helen Henderson next door had been told I was developing dementia and to call Sarah if they saw me doing anything concerning, like checking my own mail or talking to delivery drivers or having conversations they couldn't overhear. "We were just worried about you, Eleanor," Helen explained when I asked about their sudden interest in my activities. "Sarah said you'd been having episodes where you forgot things or got confused about where you were. She asked us to keep an eye out for your safety." The Johnsons across the street had been given a similar story. The Patels 2 houses down had been told I might wander and to call Sarah immediately if they saw me outside alone. They'd weaponized my entire neighborhood, turning my community into unwitting surveillance for their conspiracy. But the scope of the financial fraud was staggering. This wasn't just stealing from my checking account. They'd opened credit cards in my name using forged signatures, applied for loans using my house as collateral, loans I'd never seen but was legally responsible for. Even taken out additional life insurance policies with themselves as beneficiaries, paying the premiums from my own stolen money. My credit report showed financial activity spanning back 2 years. Store credit cards I'd never applied for. A car loan for a vehicle I'd never seen. Even a second mortgage on my house that had been used to purchase investment properties I knew nothing about. The guardianship petition wasn't just filed. It was part of a coordinated legal strategy. They'd submitted medical evidence from Dr. Morrison, financial evidence of my supposed mismanagement, and witness statements from Maria, the Hendersons, and even Jake Morrison about my alleged cognitive decline. Everything was designed to create an unshakable legal case for my incompetence. But I discovered something that turned my blood to ice. A recorded conversation between Sarah and Michael discussing contingency plans if the guardianship didn't go smoothly. "What if she fights it?" Michael asked. "She won't," Sarah replied confidently. "Morrison's medical evidence is unshakable, and we have witnesses. But if she does, we move to Plan B." "What's Plan B?" "Remember what happened to Morrison's other problem patient last year? Margaret Whitman? Sudden cardiac event during a stress episode. Very sad, very natural. Margaret Whitman. I remembered her. A sharp, independent woman in her 70s who'd been fighting her own family's attempt to control her finances. She'd died suddenly during what was reported as a panic attack brought on by the stress of the legal proceedings. I researched Margaret's case online. Her death had been attributed to natural causes, a cardiac event triggered by the emotional stress of family conflict. No autopsy had been performed because she'd been under Dr. Morrison's care for anxiety and cardiac issues. Dr. Morrison had signed her death certificate. Sarah and Michael hadn't just planned my financial murder. They'd done this before. Margaret Whitman's estate had been settled quickly and quietly. Her children, who'd been pursuing guardianship, inherited everything without any legal complications. Dr. Morrison had been well compensated for his compassionate care during her final months. I found the medical records they'd created for me, stored in Sarah's computer. A detailed history of cardiac episodes, anxiety attacks, and cognitive decline episodes, none of which had actually happened. But the documentation was thorough enough to justify any sudden cardiac event that might occur during the stress of legal proceedings. They had a detailed timeline for my murder, disguised as natural death from heart failure brought on by the stress of fighting the guardianship. But the most chilling discovery was a document called Post-Event Procedures. Step-by-step instructions for what to do immediately after my death to ensure rapid estate settlement and minimal investigation. Who to call first? How to present the death to emergency responders? Which funeral home had already been paid to handle arrangements quickly and quietly? How to expedite probate court proceedings? Even talking points for interviews with any insurance investigators. Express genuine grief, but emphasize that Eleanor had been declining for months and that this was not unexpected. Mention her cardiac condition and the stress she'd been under. Be cooperative but not overly detailed. Redirect questions to Dr. Morrison's medical records. They'd rehearsed my murder like a stage play. The financial planning was equally detailed. Which assets to liquidate immediately, which investments to transfer before any estate complications, how to access my retirement accounts without triggering tax penalties, even which household items to sell and which to keep for sentimental reasons to maintain appearances. The insurance policies alone would net them $2 million immediately upon my death. The house, which was mortgage-free, would sell for at least $800,000. My investment accounts, after they'd finished stealing from them, would still yield over $6 million. The total value of my murder to them, approximately $5 million. But they'd made one critical error in all their planning. They'd assumed I was actually the confused, vulnerable old woman they needed me to be. I wasn't. I was Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, and I'd spent 45 years prosecuting people exactly like them. I knew their tactics because I'd seen them before. I understood their psychology because I'd studied it professionally. I could predict their moves because I'd watched other predators make the same mistakes. and I was about to demonstrate why underestimating your opponent is the most dangerous mistake you can make. They thought they were dealing with a victim. They were actually dealing with a prosecutor who'd been building a case against them for weeks. Their own evidence would destroy them. 45 years practicing law had taught me something crucial about warfare. When you're going to destroy your enemies, you don't just fight back, you ensure total, systematic, irreversible victory. I began by reactivating my professional networks, starting with the most powerful connections first. My bar association membership was still active. I'd maintained it even in retirement. My law license was current. My professional reputation was intact. And my name still carried weight in legal circles throughout Massachusetts. Eleanor Hartwell? The voice on the phone was Patricia Williams, my former partner at Hartwell & Associates, and she sounded genuinely delighted to hear from me. "We haven't heard from you since you retired. Please tell me you're calling because you're bored and want to come back." "Actually, Patricia, I need help. Someone is trying to steal my life." Within 20 minutes, I'd outlined the entire conspiracy. Within an hour, Patricia had called an emergency partners meeting. Within 24 hours, I had the full resources of one of Boston's most prestigious law firms at my disposal. Pro bono, of course. Professional courtesy for a founding partner who'd helped build the firm's reputation over decades. "Eleanor, this is exactly the kind of elder abuse case we've been fighting for years," Patricia told me. "Except most of our clients don't have your legal background or your ability to document evidence. You've essentially prosecuted your own case." But legal representation was just the beginning. I needed law enforcement that understood the complexity of financial crimes against the elderly. I contacted Detective Amanda Foster at the Massachusetts Elder Protection Division. She'd been handling elder abuse cases for 12 years and had prosecuted some of the most sophisticated schemes in the state. "Mrs. Hartwell, if what you're telling me is accurate, this could be the largest elder abuse prosecution in Massachusetts history," she said during our phone call. "The level of planning, the multiple conspirators, the attempted murder component. We'd like to assign a full task force to your case." Within 48 hours, I had a team of 6 detectives working my case full-time. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was even more interested. Agent Robert Martinez specialized in elder fraud and had been investigating similar cases across New England. When I showed him the evidence I'd gathered, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "The federal charges alone will put them away for decades," he told me. The level of planning, the interstate banking fraud, the insurance conspiracy. This hits every major federal statute for elder abuse. We want to use your case to set precedents that will protect thousands of other elderly victims. But I needed more than law enforcement. I needed the kind of private investigation expertise that could document every detail of their conspiracy with legal precision. Thomas Reed had worked with me on complex cases for 20 years. He was the best private investigator in Boston, specializing in financial fraud and domestic surveillance. When I called him, his response was immediate. "Eleanor, you're describing a criminal enterprise. Give me 72 hours and I'll get you photographs, audio recordings, and financial documentation that will make this case prosecutors' dream." The medical component required special handling. I needed independent verification that would demolish their claims about my cognitive decline. Dr. Sandra Peterson was chief of geriatrics at Massachusetts General Hospital, with impeccable credentials and 30 years of experience in cognitive assessment. Her evaluation was thorough, professional, and devastating to their medical fraud claims. "Mrs. Hartwell, not only are you mentally competent, you scored in the 98th percentile for cognitive function in your age group," she told me after a comprehensive 3-hour evaluation. "There's no medical justification for any guardianship proceeding. In fact, your cognitive abilities are superior to most people half your age." But I wasn't just building a defense. I was constructing an elaborate trap that would catch them in the act of celebrating their own crimes. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for Friday morning at 9 a.m. They thought they were walking into a legal formality where I'd be represented by a court-appointed attorney who'd barely read my file and wouldn't challenge their medical evidence. Instead, I arranged for 3 senior partners from Hartwell & Associates to represent me: Patricia Williams, James Chen, and Robert Anderson, collectively representing over 90 years of courtroom experience and a track record of never losing an elder abuse case, the kind of legal firepower usually reserved for Fortune 500 companies and federal appeals. But I wanted more than just a successful defense. I wanted them caught in the act of criminal celebration. I arranged for Thursday evening to be very special. A phone call that would convince them they'd already won, delivered by a professional actress I hired through theatrical connections in Boston. "Mrs. Hartwell has suffered a massive cardiac event," the voice would say, calling from a number that would show up as Boston General Hospital on their caller ID. Despite our best efforts, she passed away peacefully at 7:15 this evening. I wanted to record their immediate reaction, their unguarded celebration, their true character revealed when they thought no one was watching. Thomas Reed's technical team installed surveillance equipment throughout their house. Hidden cameras that would record high-definition video, audio recording devices that would capture every word, computer monitoring that would track any immediate attempts to access my accounts. I even arranged for a temporary death certificate to be filed with the State Vital Records Office. It would be reversed Friday morning, but for 12 hours, Eleanor Hartwell would officially be dead. The technical setup was elegant and comprehensive. Thomas Reed's team had installed micro cameras throughout their house, in the kitchen where they held their private conversations, in Michael's office where they accessed my accounts, even in their bedroom where they celebrated their victories. Audio recording devices were positioned to capture conversations from every angle. Computer monitoring software would track any immediate attempts to access my financial accounts or insurance policies. Even their phones were being monitored through legal wiretaps authorized by federal warrant. I rented an apartment across the street under an assumed name, where I could watch the entire operation unfold in real time through multiple video feeds. Thursday evening at 7:15, exactly as planned, their phone rang. I watched through the surveillance feed as Sarah answered, her face shifting from casual annoyance at the interruption to practiced shock and grief as she received the news of my death. The performance lasted exactly 90 seconds. She hung up the phone, turned to Michael, who was watching television, and delivered the news with appropriate family tragedy. "Mom's gone," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of stunned sorrow. "The hospital said she had another cardiac event. They tried everything, but—" Michael's reaction was perfect: shock, grief, confusion. He played the devastated son beautifully for about 2 minutes. Then Sarah opened a bottle of champagne. "Finally," she said, loud enough for our recording devices to capture every syllable. "Finally free of that manipulative old witch. Do you know how exhausting it's been pretending to care about her for the last 2 years?" Michael was more cautious but equally revealing. "Are you sure she's really dead? This feels too easy." I called the hospital back and confirmed. Sarah lied smoothly. Dr. Morrison was there. He said it was expected given her condition and the stress she'd been under. He's already started the paperwork. They spent the next 3 hours planning how to divide my estate. Sarah wanted the house and the investment accounts. Michael wanted the insurance money and the vehicles. They discussed which assets to liquidate first, which ones they could hide from estate taxes, and how quickly they could access my bank accounts. The conversation was detailed, calculating, and utterly damning. "We need to be at the lawyer's office first thing tomorrow morning," Sarah said, "before anyone else finds out and starts asking questions or making claims against the estate." "What about Emma?" Michael asked, referring to my granddaughter. "She's going to be devastated." "Kids bounce back," Sarah replied callously. "Besides, now we can afford to send her to private school and buy her whatever she wants. She'll be too distracted to grieve for long." They called Dr. Morrison to share the news. His response was chilling. "Perfect timing," he said over speakerphone. I've already prepared all the necessary documentation. Heart failure brought on by the stress of her declining mental state. No autopsy will be required given her medical history. You're sure about the autopsy? Sarah asked. Completely. I've been documenting her cardiac instability for months. This was an expected outcome. The death certificate will be processed routinely. Dr. Morrison had been planning to falsify my death certificate just as he'd falsified my medical records. But the most damning evidence came when they discussed their future plans. We should probably seem grief-stricken for at least 6 months, Sarah said practically. Any major purchases or lifestyle changes need to wait until the estate is settled and people stop paying attention. What about the gambling debts? Michael asked. I can pay those off immediately now, right? Wait 2 weeks, Sarah advised. Let the death settle in people's minds first. Then you can say Mom left you some money to get back on your feet. They were already planning how to use my death as cover for their financial crimes. Friday morning, they arrived at Bernard Collins' law office at exactly 9 a.m., dressed in appropriate morning attire and carrying forged documents that would give them immediate access to my estate. Bernard was waiting for them, as planned. So was Patricia Williams from my law firm, Agent Martinez from the FBI, Detective Foster from the state police, the prosecutor from the district attorney's office, and me. I walked through those mahogany doors just as Sarah was raising her champagne glass in a private toast to their success. We're here to finalize the estate transfer and... she started. Then she saw me. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor in a sound that echoed through the room like a gunshot. Mom? Michael's voice cracked like a 14-year-old boy's. But they said you were... dead? I asked, settling into the chair at the head of the conference table with the authority I'd never actually lost. That's interesting, because I have quite a story about what happens when people celebrate too early. The FBI agent stepped forward with practiced efficiency. Agent Martinez read them their rights with the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from years of catching predators. Sarah Hartwell, Michael Hartwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, and attempted murder under federal statutes. You have the right to remain silent. Sarah's face had gone completely white, but her mind was still working. She tried one last manipulation. This is a mistake, she said, her voice carrying that same concerned tone she'd used for months. Mom, you're confused. We've been trying to help you. Dr. Morrison said you might have episodes like this where you make accusations. Agent Martinez smiled coldly. We have 18 months of documented evidence, Mrs. Hartwell, including your recorded conversation last night about how you were finally free of that manipulative old witch. The blood drained from her face as she realized the scope of what we'd captured. Patricia Williams opened her briefcase and began removing documents. We have evidence of systematic financial fraud dating back 24 months, forged signatures on 17 separate documents, unauthorized transfers totaling $4.2 million, identity theft, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was overwhelming and had been carefully organized for maximum legal impact. Computer printouts showing the systematic theft, medical records proving Dr. Morrison had falsified my cognitive evaluations, audio recordings of their planning conversations, video footage of their celebration, financial documents tracing every stolen dollar. The computer files are particularly interesting, Agent Martinez continued, including detailed plans for inducing cardiac arrest, timeline documents showing optimal dates for your death, and insurance claim preparations completed before any medical emergency had occurred. Detective Foster stepped forward with additional charges. We also have evidence linking you to the death of Margaret Whitman last year. Similar pattern, same medical professional, identical insurance fraud scheme. Michael was crying now, but not the fake tears from his gambling confession. These were the tears of someone who understood their life was over. "Mom, please," he begged. "We never meant to hurt you. The debts were real. I was desperate. We thought you'd be happier not having to worry about everything." "You thought I'd be happier dead," I corrected him. "You planned my murder, Michael. You wrote my obituary. You selected my burial dress. You calculated how much my death was worth to you." Sarah tried a different approach. "She's been unstable since the heart attack, making paranoid accusations against people who love her. This is all some elaborate fantasy." Dr. Sandra Peterson stepped forward. "I evaluated Mrs. Hartwell yesterday using the most comprehensive cognitive assessment available. She scored in the 98th percentile for cognitive function in her age group. There's no medical evidence of any mental impairment whatsoever." The prosecutor, District Attorney Catherine Walsh, had been silent until now. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 20 years prosecuting complex criminal cases. "This is the most sophisticated elder abuse conspiracy we've prosecuted in Massachusetts. The level of planning, the multiple conspirators, the attempted murder component, the connection to at least one previous victim. We'll be seeking maximum penalties under federal statutes." The charges were read in detail, each one carrying severe federal penalties. Conspiracy to commit elder abuse, up to 15 years federal prison. Financial fraud, up to 20 years federal prison. Identity theft, up to 15 years federal prison. Insurance fraud, up to 20 years federal prison. Attempted murder, up to life in federal prison. RICO violations for operating a continuing criminal enterprise, up to 20 years federal prison. The federal charges alone could put them away for over a century. Dr. Morrison was arrested at his office within the hour. The medical board had already initiated emergency proceedings to revoke his license. His golf partner, Dr. Patricia Wells, was facing her own investigation for participating in fraudulent cognitive evaluations. Bob Chen, my financial advisor, was arrested at his home that afternoon. The SEC had frozen all his assets and was investigating him for fraud, involving at least 12 other elderly clients. His relocated practice was actually a federal fugitive warrant. Maria Gonzalez was brought in for questioning that evening. When presented with evidence of her 18 months of surveillance and reporting, she broke down completely and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. Even the Hendersons next door were facing charges for their role in isolating me from potential help. Conspiracy to commit elder abuse includes anyone who knowingly assists in the isolation and manipulation of elderly victims. Jake Morrison, Dr. Morrison's nephew, was arrested at his apartment. The medical school loans were actually payments for his role in falsifying cognitive evaluation results. He'd been expelled from medical school 2 years earlier for academic fraud. The criminal network was extensive, but our investigation had been thorough. Every participant faced serious federal charges, but the criminal case was just the beginning of their punishment. The civil lawsuit would recover not just the stolen money, but punitive damages that could triple the amount under federal elder abuse statutes. My house, which they'd used as collateral for unauthorized loans, would be cleared of all fraudulent liens. The life insurance policies they'd taken out would be canceled, the premiums recovered, and the insurance companies would pursue their own fraud charges. The credit cards they'd opened in my name would be closed, the debts voided, and my credit report completely cleared. All the forged documents would be invalidated. All the unauthorized transfers would be reversed. All the stolen assets would be recovered with interest and penalties. The nursing home contract with Sunset Manor was voided, and the facility faced its own investigation for accepting fraudulent placements. Apparently, this wasn't the first time they'd been involved in suspicious elder abuse cases, but beyond the financial recovery, the case would set legal precedents that would protect thousands of other elderly victims across the country. "Mrs. Hartwell," D.A. Walsh explained, "your case will become the textbook example of how to prosecute sophisticated elder abuse. The legal precedents we set here will be used to protect vulnerable elderly people nationwide." My professional reputation was not just restored, but elevated. The legal community rallied around me with a level of support and respect that was both humbling and empowering. The Massachusetts Bar Association asked me to head a new committee on elder law protection. Harvard Law School invited me to lecture on elder abuse prosecution. The National Association of Elder Law Attorneys wanted me to keynote their annual conference. The Attorney General asked me to consult on similar cases across New England. The FBI wanted me to help train agents in recognizing sophisticated elder abuse schemes. But the most satisfying moment came during the arraignment when Sarah, in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, looked at me with pure shock. "But the medication, the confusion, you seemed so weak and helpless." "I never took your pills," I replied calmly. "I documented every single one. Evidence of attempted poisoning. You see, I may be 72 years old, but I'm Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, senior partner of Hartwell & Associates, with 45 years of experience prosecuting people exactly like you." "But you acted so confused." "That's called acting, Sarah. Something you should understand, given your performance as the caring daughter-in-law for the past 2 years." Michael made one last desperate attempt. "We never meant for it to go this far. We just needed money. The debts were real. We thought you wouldn't miss it." "You planned my murder, Michael," I said, my voice carrying the full weight of maternal disappointment and prosecutorial authority. "You wrote my obituary. You selected my burial outfit. You calculated exactly how much my death was worth to you. That's not desperation. That's evil." The judge set bail at $5 million each, which they obviously couldn't afford. They would remain in federal custody until trial. The trial date was set for 6 months out, giving prosecutors time to prepare what they expected to be the most comprehensive elder abuse case in federal court history. The guilty verdict was unanimous on all counts. The sentencing was swift and severe. Sarah received 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Michael received 20 years in federal prison. Dr. Morrison received 15 years and permanent loss of medical license. Bob Chen received 12 years and lifetime ban from financial services. The others received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years. The message was clear. Elder abuse would not be tolerated, and the consequences would be devastating for anyone who attempted it. 5 years later, I'm still practicing law. I never did retire properly, and now I understand why. The Hartwell Institute for Elder Legal Protection operates out of my old office building, now expanded to include 3 floors and 28 attorneys specializing in elder abuse prevention and prosecution. We've helped over 1,200 families recognize and prevent financial exploitation. We've successfully prosecuted 47 elder abuse cases, recovered over $30 million in stolen assets, and sent 63 criminals to prison for elder abuse crimes. The precedents set by my case have strengthened elder protection laws in all 50 states. Federal legislation passed 2 years ago made elder abuse a federal crime with mandatory minimum sentences, largely based on the legal framework we established. Sarah is serving her sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Danbury. She's eligible for release in 22 years when she'll be 56 years old. Her appeals have all been denied. Michael is at Federal Correctional Institution Devens. He'll be eligible for release in 17 years. His gambling addiction is being treated in prison, though it's too little, too late. Dr. Morrison died in federal prison 18 months ago. Heart attack, which seemed fitting. His medical license was permanently revoked, and his name is used in medical ethics courses as an example of professional betrayal. The restitution was complete, plus punitive damages that totaled over $14 million. Most of that money funds the Institute now, ensuring that my near murder creates lasting protection for other vulnerable elderly people. I speak at medical conferences about recognizing the warning signs of professional complicity in elder abuse. Dr. Morrison's case is now taught in medical ethics courses across the country. I lecture at law schools about elder abuse prosecution strategies. My case study is required reading in criminal law courses at 17 universities. The FBI uses my case to train agents in recognizing sophisticated elder abuse schemes. I've consulted on over 200 similar cases across the country. I never remarried. I never had other children. But I have something more valuable, a purpose that gives meaning to every day I have left. My granddaughter Emma visits every weekend now. She's studying law at Harvard, inspired by what she calls Grandma's victory over the bad guys. She wants to specialize in elder law, carrying forward the family tradition of protecting vulnerable people. She doesn't remember the details of what her parents tried to do, but she understands that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you can be the most dangerous. She's learned that it's not only okay to fight back, sometimes it's necessary. The hardest lesson I learned about people? Family can be the most dangerous predators of all. They know your vulnerabilities intimately. They have your trust completely. They understand exactly how to exploit both your love and your weaknesses. They use your desire to believe the best about them as a weapon against you. They turn your need for family connection into a tool for manipulation. They weaponize your own emotions against your best interests. But here's what I want you to know, and this is crucial. You don't have to be helpless. You don't have to accept that manipulation is just family being concerned, or difficult circumstances. Trust your instincts, especially when something feels wrong, but you can't quite explain why. Document everything: conversations, financial transactions, medical appointments, changes in behavior. Keep your independence as long as possible, and don't let anyone convince you that needing help means giving up control. Remember that sometimes the person everyone underestimates, the confused old woman, the grieving widow, the vulnerable patient, is exactly the person you don't want as an enemy. And if you're facing something like this yourself, know that there are people who will believe you, who will help you, who will fight for you. You don't have to face predators alone. What's the hardest lesson you had to learn about people? Share your wisdom below. Real recognize real, and your experience might save someone else the pain I went through. Because that's what this is really about. Not just my victory, but protecting the next vulnerable person from going through what I survived.